I'm Travis. This is Ben. And we're going to be talking about Bro and IDS, IPS. And that's going to be using the operating system SecurityOnion.
Thank you. All right, cool. So I thought it'd be kind of a good way to start this off with kind of just going over the three principles of security. And we went with the CIA triad with that. So you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it was made by the CIA, called the CIA triad. And let's run down the list with them. So let's start with confidentiality. So confidentiality kind of revolves around the principle of on who needs to know basis. So this is going to come down to your user, like your access lists. When a user signs in, what resources do they actually have access to? And since keeping your data safe, there's a few different principles at hand here. So you have your identification, so who you're actually logging in with it. So your username. Then you'll have your authentication, your password, or if you have two-factor authentication. And then your authorization, which is coming back to your permissions again, and who has control with what resources, what can they access. So if we're going to go down the line, next is integrity. And it specifically revolves around data integrity. So making sure that your data is unchanged by unauthorized users, whether that could be an act of God nature, say a server gets struck down. If you don't have a backup, technically data integrity has been compromised. So there's few different ways you can do that. Backups, hash checks, which is making sure a file has been untouched or unchanged. And then access control, which comes back to the confidentiality, just making sure correct people have correct access to your network resources. So going down the line, we have availability next, which can kind of be the most expensive of the three, depending on how you set it up. So availability comes down to the ability for users to have the network resources or connections they need when it's needed. So that's coming down to your uptime, which could be, depending on your necessities, a lot of people try to shoot for 99.99999%, the 5 nines rule. To achieve this, you could have different means. You could have redundant network, servers, hardware. You could have extra, say, power supply as well as backup kicks in. You have backup sites where you can have cold sites, which could just be an empty room, warm site, hot site, so that depending on your needs, if something fails, you can be back up within a certain amount of time. And just a general network speed requirement. So depending on, say, if you have a group of users, like if you're Netflix, you need to have your servers have fast pipelines to the users. With net neutrality coming through, we'll see how that goes. So the reason we kind of brought up the three principles of security for this portion is because IDS and IPS, it's an acronym for Intrusion Detection Systems and Intrusion Prevention Systems. But we kind of wanted to set a baseline for what is an intrusion, because it's kind of a less descriptive of what these devices actually do. So going off of this, we have, what is a network attack? Well, we've kind of ran down the list. We thought of a few different things. Obviously, can't get everything, but we could have distributed denial of service attack, man-in-the-middle attack, stolen data, website defacing, war driving. So you could go down the list. You could have so many examples. So we just decided to go with anything that tries to hinder one or more of the security principles would be a network attack. And that seems kind of fair. So then we went to, what is a network intrusion? Well, we kind of decided it just means that when someone gets into a network that they're not authorized to be in. To keep it a little bit simple, because That's what it kind of means. So next, we went with what's a network breach. So we kind of thought around like, well, breach could be, they got into your network, but that's also just an intrusion. So we decided it's when someone gets to your network, device, or system that they didn't have authorization to be in, and they got something, and they got out with it. So that's where we kind of are right here. We set this up to kind of segue into IDS, IPS, because the name intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, it's not just about stopping someone from actually intruding into your network. It's to stop or detect network attacks in general. So there's kind of a misnomer between the both. A lot of people are thinking that IDS is going to just phase out and become IDPS eventually. Essentially, you still have to be able to detect the intrusion or attack, and then whether or not you prevent it is dependent on what you're using or your actual configurations for your software. Look at that. It's pretty nice. All right. So we have intrusion detection systems. They monitor your networks. They can provide event logging, notifications, generally just detection. If you're solely detecting, it's going to be out of band. You're not going to have it into the direct line of traffic scanning every single bit. And they're generally going to be using 3 different forms of detection. And that's signature-based detection, statistical anomaly-based detection, and stateful protocol analysis detection. So a quick demo. If you're only doing IDS, you have your IDS device or your switch, you get sent a packet, and it's a good one. So it goes through, no checks, nothing. And then if it notices a bad packet, it doesn't block it, but it does send a notification, whether that be to an email, depending on how you set it up, or if you have a database or a management server. So for signature-based detection, a lot of them you actually download just signature files, and they can be updated quite frequently. And it goes off of known malicious code, malicious sequences. So unfortunately, it's not really good at detecting new devices, but it is good at detecting known attacks, known attempts. So a telnet attempt with username root, an email with a bad attachment, or if there's specific system operating logs, like if someone's disabled the auditing on your operating system. So your pros, again, it's simple, it's easy, it's efficient, low false positive count. It looks for specific attacks and explicit. And it's easy to update for the most part, doesn't require too much tuning. Really, the cons are it only works for known attacks. It doesn't work, so if someone, say if you have a bad file, a lot of times if you change just the file name, like badfile.exe to badfile2.exe, the signature on that file can actually change. Well, that just got past your signature-based detection now. And then you have your statistical anomaly-based detection, which it compares to a set baseline. It can use patterns and signatures depending on the actual specific system. So the way you can set the pattern or the baseline, you can actually set it up statically or dynamically. It depends on your network growth. So you'd set a window of, say, it could be a day or a week, where you're just monitoring traffic, and you set that as your baseline. If you have it set as a static baseline, it's not changing. It's going to be there forever. If something's going to be deviates from that normal baseline, that's when you're going to get a notification. Or you could set it dynamically. If your network changes over time, it can gradually learn to adapt to that traffic. However, that can cause some issues. So if you, for example, if you're being attacked by a DDoS, over time, if they started slow and started ramping it up, it wouldn't really detect that because it's been a slow ramp up. Oh, cool. So, the pros of the statistical anomaly is that it doesn't depend on signatures, so it can actually find new attacks that were previously unknown. And the protocols can actually be dissected at every layer, providing robust coverage. Also, for the statistical anomaly-based, it can actually, depending on the IDS, IPS you use, you can actually use combinations for it, so you aren't always restricted to one type of scanning, essentially. Some cons, you get high false positives. It's vulnerable to a learning period. So the learning period, if we come back to that baseline, if something happens in that first day or that week where you're setting your baseline, that becomes part of the protocol or part of the profile. So if you're getting DDoS that first day and they set that as your baseline, well, it's essentially going to be useless. So ability for delivery attack over a long period of time. For tuning, it's a little bit difficult tuning, as you can set whitelists and blacklists for almost all these. This one, however, you're going to have a threshold tuning where you're just going to say, hey, this is our baseline, and then this is our threshold, to where if we start seeing activity beyond this threshold, that's when we're going to start actually letting you know that something's going on. And then we come with our last one, the Stateful Protocol analysis detection, which similar to signature-based, but it's going to be based more on your vendor's actual predefined protocols. So identifies deviations of the protocol state. An example, monitoring requests with the corresponding response. So a lot of your, like say if you're going to FTP into something, there's a specific set of expected commands before you actually log in. So you're expected to provide a username and password and not 1,000 character line of code. So if it's noticing some abnormalities coming through, that's when it actually sends you the notifications that something weird is going on in your network. So pros is that it can, since it's not signature-based, it can actually detect things that, like unknown attacks, just based off the fact that it's not what it's expecting. That's pretty cool. So, so the reasonable checks, it comes back to the thresholds for individual commands. So again, you could have the long characters for a username where it wouldn't be expecting that. Or you could try, like say if you're trying to log in, if you just kept hitting enter with a blank username or a blank password continuously over and over again, that comes back to, is this part of the stateful protocol? Is this what we're expecting to receive as a response? If not, send a notification. The cons is pretty resource intensive. So it also is very specific to vendors, so it's going to be, it provides a limited availability for tuning in that respect. So customization and tuning is going to be pretty limited with stateful protocol analysis. So that's where we come from detection and we go to prevention. So it's like an IDS, but it takes action in a sense. So, like I said, you can't have prevention without detection. So you can't actually prevent the attacks without knowing what's actually happening. So prevention systems are usually inline, so they're going to scan data as they're coming through your network. Some can have out-of-band or passive detectors, in a sense, depending on your specific needs for your network. But most of them are going to. So you have your 4 types, your NIPS, WIPS, your NBA, and your HIPS. And let's do a quick demo. So in this regard, a good packet comes through, checks out, it's good. In contrast to the IDS, which it's still let the packet through, but it's sending you a notification. In a prevention, if you have it set so, it'll detect a bad packet, stop it, and then it's just gone. Or in some instances, it can replace the data on there, make it a clean packet, or it could adjust firewalls to fully block further communication. So there's a few components, both respective to IDS and IPS. We have the sensor or agent, which is essentially, it could be a physical appliance that's attached to your network, or it could be a software package that you've actually installed on a computer on your network. You have your management server, which if you have multiple IPS systems, they can connect to a central management server where you're actually able to access, do configurations on them, and manage your devices. You have a database server, which some organizations can use, some cannot. It's just essentially used as a data server to store your logging and information. And then you have your console, which is actually used to interface with the devices and manage them. So with your network-based intrusion prevention systems, they're going to be monitoring traffic usually on a specific network segment, so part of your network. They can be set up near an edge router if need be, depending on your actual network, but it's going to be resource intensive. So it acts somewhat like a firewall in a sense. So if you're in line, you're generally going to have a set device, either an appliance, or you could have your own system configured with a really beefy internet card, network card. And it can scan all your data that's coming through and going out to your network. Or if you're going to be using out-of-band, you can set it up on workstations. You can set up your switches to have a spanning port to send all your data that's coming through your network to this one computer so it can dig through it passively without actually touching the data and interrupting it. Some pros, it's pretty good at detecting things. It logs all your data. It can log all your traffic. Depending on how you set it up, everything that's going to go through your device, it's going to be logged. If it notices anything, you can set it up to actually send notifications to your devices. You can have them set up specific events, like, for instance, if there was an attack happening, an authorized attack happening, it could send an TCP end to both parties to cut the connection, or it could adjust your firewall rules. It's really dependent on what platform you're using, what software you're using, and the capabilities. The issue with it is it kind of has a high false positive and false negative count. So if you're going to be scanning all your data, you're probably going to be creating a lot of notifications, and you're going to have to dig through that. It's going to be pretty resource intensive on the system, and someone's going to have to actually dig through that, so it's going to be labor intensive too. So it does require a lot of tuning and customization with whitelists and allowing certain traffic, denying specific other traffics. So they can actually shut down, actually stop scanning traffic if it becomes too resource intensive. So a lot of options are to actually set over a failover network so that if your IDS, IPS can no longer manage it, you switch over to another network segment to route your data through so you're not shutting down all your availability for your network. Then we have the wireless intrusion prevention system, the WIPS. So it only actually analyzes attacks in the actual wireless protocol. It doesn't actually do any higher level application or higher level network scanning, so TCP layers or application layer. And the sensors for wireless, they're a little bit different. They could be anything from, you could set up a sensor station on the laptop and walk around and scan your network, try to look for any rogue devices. Or you can actually get individual appliances that you'd be setting up throughout your organization that would scan for unwanted activity. So one of the things with that, though, they can only monitor one channel at a time unless they have multiple radios in them. So they're actually switching channels often in order to check every potential channel for an attack or an unwanted visitor. So pros, you can actually identify a physical location. If you're set up, you can triangulate where, like, say, if someone is setting up a rogue device, you can try to triangulate and find the actual physical location of that. Has a lot lower false positives than the other devices for intrusion prevention. That mainly comes back to the fact that it's not scanning a bunch of different layers. It's really only specifically scanning the one layer, so there's not too much customization, not too much potential for false positives. The cons, however, is that it is susceptible to a DDoS attack, or probably if someone turns a microwave on. And the scalability costs, if you have a larger organization, it's going to become quite more expensive to have sensors loaded all over, and planning your actual design for the network is going to be pretty intensive. And then we have our network behavior analysis, which a lot of organizations actually use this one out of band, or they'll put it before your edge router or your firewall. It's actually it's actually analyzing network flows. So it does use statistical anomaly detection. Some do have some signature-based capabilities, very limited, however. So it's really good at some specific items. It's really good at detecting DDoS attacks, worms, port scanning, or just general things that generate a lot of network activity. So if you're going to put it like in front of your firewall, for example, it can actually protect the firewall from a DDoS attack, in a sense. Or if you're going to set it out of band, a lot of people set up another port spanning, or they'll set it up in their DMZ zone in order to just say, hey, we kind of want to see what's going on here. We might not stop this traffic, but we want to see what's actually going on in this area. So some of the cons of this is that it actually takes longer to detect the attacks. So an example for a DDoS, if it starts slow, it'll take a while before it actually starts realizing, hey, someone's attacking us. So that's where it actually comes in with the low bandwidth scale attacks as well. So if someone starts low with the attack and starts ramping it up, since it's generally statistical anomaly based, you'll still have your baseline standard. But if you slowly ramp up, it's going to take a lot longer for it to actually realize something's happening. And some devices, it's vendor dependent, do have signature-based detections, so like a signature for a worm that's coming through your network. But generally, it's pretty limited to statistical anomalies. And then you have your host-based intrusion prevention system, which is installed specifically on a single host, or it could be installed as an appliance between the network and that host to scan all the traffic. This is probably one of the more customizable ones. So you can actually, depending on how you want to use it, you can have it monitor the actual operating system operations. That could be anything from changes to the file system, unauthorized logins. You can have it monitor specific web applications, like a web server, database programs, or you could actually, in the other respect, if you have it set up between the network and device, you can analyze the network-specific traffic. Some pros: you can use a lot of combinations of techniques to provide a lot of robust protection and detection for a specific computer. Generally, a lot of organizations will use these types of host-based intrusion prevention systems to actually just harden important computers, like your web server, database server. Generally, it's not used on a lot of user computers, just because it's highly resource intensive. And one of the main pros, again, just customization. You can set anything from just OS changes to the network changes. Really depends on what you're going to be using the system for. So since it does have a lot of customization, it does have a lot of cons involved that could be high false positives and false negatives. Since it's scanning more data, there's a greater chance just to have out of 100, 50 notifications. If you're going to scan less data, out of 20, 5 notifications. It's kind of 1 in 4 or half. So some of the other issues that we do run into with host-based is that they do require a lot of resources. Generally, it's not going to be too bad if you're only going to run it on your servers or your databases. We also do run into OS compatibility issues, and you just have to take that up with the vendor. All right. Yeah.
All right. Now, since we've got a general overview of IDS, IPS, within the system itself, in order to make a few rules to actually elaborate on to what we want to monitor through thresholds or through blocking, there's general rules that you can configure for this. Snort is the example that we're going to go with, mainly because it's part of the SecurityOnion. It uses either Suricata or it goes off these Snort rules. Suricata is fairly similar to Snort, and it's actually developed by Cisco themselves. So going through the rules, we've got the first part, which is the action. In this case, we're going to actually log the event that happened. The second partition is going to be either UDP or TCP. And then this one, we've got the starting network, and then we're specifying a range of ports. That colon is going to be talked about a little bit later. This arrow right here is actually showing the direction. So we've got the starting network talking to the later network, and you can either put just one arrow, so it's only that traffic coming in going to that network, or you can use an arrow specifying both ways. And then lastly, we've got the destination network, and then the ports. So this is just an example of, we can define this partition coming in over here versus the network that we're actually going to be going to. And then in the other case of the 2 arrows, it'd be both ways. Logging examples. Again, over here on the first line, we've got the colon. So that's going to be anything before up to that point. And then we've also got the colon in, others. And so it's anything that's greater than or equal to the 500. And then down here, we've also got an example of just any. So it's just any port. And then alerting. So there's different types of actions that we can take on this. So log is just, it comes in, we look at, the system looks at it, stores it away somewhere, and then you may or may not ever look at it again. Alerting is actually going to have an action. We can define in here the content in which we care about. So we've got any port over here. We're going to alert on TCP coming in. We've got our IP. It's going to alert. It's only talking to this. Here's our content in which we're looking for. And then the message is whatever you want it to be. It's just something for your viewing eyes only. It's once that action happens, it goes into your logs. So you've got active and dynamic. You can actually make actions that happen with a particular threshold being hit. So here's flags. We'll talk about flags in the next slide. There's content in which we're looking for. So anything that actually is part of this. These brackets here are an OR, so anything with a bin. So if you've got a file that's coming in that's looking to attack this part, like the bin file of a server of some sort, or traffic, it's trying to save applications on there. It would actually make a reaction off that. And then you can also define a threshold off of activities. So if somebody goes in there and I want to go to a server and save something to it, and I just do it once, it's going to kick off on this. If we put it up to 100, for example, so SSH is a good example for this. If I want to get into my server and I SSH into it, sure, you may screw up 1 or 2 times. So we'll change it up to 3, for example. And I get in. Nothing happens. Now, if I'm a hacker, I'm not just going to quit at 2 or 3 times. I want in and I want now. So I'm going to brute force in and I'm going to try 500 times a second. That's a little crazy for you and I and some of the other users. So we'll put that in there and then it actually goes off. This way it also diminishes the amount of logs that you're receiving and you don't have to go through as much, and it lowers the amount of false positives that you would have in there. Again, we've got the message. So if we did change this to SSH or whatever that you choose, you can put that little blurb in there just to specify that, yes, this is what I should be looking for. It's a little heads up for myself. Dynamic is going to be part of the action phase, so this is actually going to be a little bit more different. So you've got your action here, and then the count number for the range. And then flags. So flags we can count for, it's actually part of the TCP. It's TCP only, and it's part of the packet itself. So it's either the finish sign, the SYN sign, so on and so forth. The presentations are going to be online, so you guys can go through that. And then this is more of the actions that we can take for all of these. Again, we've got logging, just in case you never want to look at it. Just look at it for later. The alerting. Passing is just to ignore it. Reject, and we can also drop packets. That's, again, going in there. Somebody comes in here. We know it's a bad packet. We've put in that rule, and we just want it to be done, and we drop it. Here's a little demo about SecurityOnion. We took it, installed it, and these... I'm not. So we installed SecurityOnion. Right here, we're going to go into the rules where it's stored for our Snort rules. LS and Linux, we're listing all the rules in here. Nano, that's my choice of editing for this. Over here's the rule. We've got our action, our destination. Got the little reference, which is just another part of the log that's going to go in there just for myself. So if I saw this, I could actually just click on the link and go. Here we're going to update the rules. It's based around, their icon's a pig, so you see a lot of pig references like pulled pork, one pig's fly, and then the barnyard processes as well. Right here, we do restart all of the services, so if you do make a lot of rule changes, it will restart the process itself, so it is down for a moment of time. And then there's a little tool that they have called Scapy, and Scapy's a nice little tool, so something like SSH, I can try SSHing into something, and it could kick off my rule if I would like. Scapy's actually going to try something else. You can specify payloads as well. So we can pick our source, our destination, wherever we're trying to represent the packet in which we're trying to stop. So this will come in here. We're specifying our destination, our source address. We specify that it's TCP. We're specifying the destination port. And we're also going to specify the source port. You can also do the payloads. I chose not to in this example. We're just doing SSH. We do the send. And then it sends one packet for this. Over here, you can see this is ELSA, and this is just the representation of everything that we've specified in here. My rule kicked off. I got one person trying to access, and it's more of a prettier way of viewing all of the rules that you've got in here, so you can actually come in here and see a lot quicker. And then all of the database behind it is actually Bro. Here's some of the commands that I use, just if you're not familiar with Linux at all. What we use in the demo is SecurityOnions. It's pre-made. You put it on there. OS goes. You can either do the demo version, or there's the actual full-blown version, which comes with Suricata. And the major difference between this and Suricata is with Snort, you're going to have to define processes within it. So if you have a 4-core computer, you're going to have to make 4 different processes for it. It will not actually auto-fill and just take up all your resources. Suricata will. And that's just the major difference between those two. It runs on Ubuntu. Snort was the IDS or IDPS that's on there. Bro is going to be the analytics portion that sends it to the database, and that's going to be that bro_con that's on there. And it's got its own query language for that. You can actually make different dashboards to just customize what you're doing and how you want to view your information that's coming in there. And then ELSA is just enterprise log search and archive, and that's the little display in the web format that you can go through and just click on whatever you want and view everything a lot easier. And it's all open source. So you guys can go home, play with it if you want. It's free. Go have fun. Bro's its own programming language. It's more of a scripting language than anything. So you can go in there and you can actually define events again. You can define how those events kick off. You can define it, like if that number were to reach up so far, you can make it do other reactions and make this IDS, IPS do more. Bropy, it works with TCP dump. It's something that the community's built to try to assist with newer people trying to use this tool. And what happens is you'll take a TCP dump and you'll put it into Bropy and it'll analyze it, and you'll see greater amounts of traffic. So if you're having trouble judging thresholds or trying to figure out where to go, it actually makes more recommendations, and you would take those rules, copy and paste them, and put them on yourself. And it helps you gauge where you're at currently on your network. So now that we got all that information, we just got to know when to use it. IDS, let's always use it. It's a logging system. We don't know what's happening until we got eyes on everything. And without logging things, we don't have eyes on anything. And it's hard to figure out what's happening. It's hard to find somebody on your network or even know that there's somebody on your network if you're not logging anything. IPS, it's more so if you have something that you're willing to block. If you really want to block something, if it's just going to a LAN environment with a few users, if it's okay for them to be down for a little bit, change your thresholds. They go down, it's okay, accept the risk. And then we'll let Ben talk about certificate.
All right, so we kind of decided to add a little bit of certificates at the end of these slides, just because we're not going to recommend one over the other as a general rule, but there are some that might work better for some people versus others. Right now, I'm going to go ahead. I'm planning to take the CSA Plus Cybersecurity Analyst certificate. The main reason is because instead of renewing my Security Plus, I was thought, why not just climb the ladder instead? So these are all the CompTIA certificates. This one is relatively new, the CASP test. A lot of people and the DoD compare it to the CISSP. It's a little bit under that, but for some people it might be better to try to go for this versus that, or versus the SANS. And the reason being is, I mean, if you have the money and the experience, go for the highest you can. Or if you're already getting paid for what you're doing, maybe you don't need that. The CASP, the pro to this is that it's a lot cheaper. It's about half the cost of the CISSP, and the SANS are really expensive. You don't actually have to have prior work experience to actually go and take this exam. The CISSP, you do actually need 5 years work experience in order to actually get the physical certificate. You can get a lower base version of it by taking the test, and then you can get the actual certificate after you've proven you have the experience. So some pros, it's cheaper. It's becoming more of a recognized certificate in the industry. A lot of people are starting to actually realize it. And all in all, I'd say it's just generally good. Even if you aren't interested in getting any of the certificates, if you're starting as an entry level and you're interested in diving into security, network security, the actual study guide materials for the certificate are pretty reasonable. I'd say it's a really good intro into actually getting to cybersecurity. And we actually found out the codes that they use to give you a discount in the study guides are not dynamic. So I'm guessing until the end of 2017, you could use that for any of them. I'm guessing 2018 will be Wiley 2018. Just a hunch. I mean, so you get 10% off. It's like up to $35. So I think at the end, does anyone have any questions about certificates or Slide or Bro or anything in general? Yes, you, sir.
The hardware is going to be different on how much you're going to be taking in and how much you actually plan on viewing. So depending on your speed and your bandwidth that's coming in actually defines the it's going to define your CPU and your memory right away. And then logging, it really depends on how much you want to use. A smaller scaled network is going to be about a quad core with 35 gigs of RAM. There are there's a few links at the end that actually go into the hardware. I think it's actually in the resources. Let's see if it's all the way down there. I think it's way down there. Yeah, there's a few more at the end where we do actually go into the system requirements, and it will give you a little bit better information. I don't have all the numbers off the top of my head, but it does come down to logging. It's an extravagant amount of data. Like they're talking about terabytes just chilling there just to hold it for like 30 days on a smaller end network. But I did watch a few videos on a conference. The guy's got hundreds of these out there. So you could have it, and they can all sync up. Bro's the database portion of it, so if you are syncing everything back to that, you're just going to have to query that for all your information. So I guess for the video's sake, we'll repeat the question. It's how well does this scale? And it basically comes down to it scales very well, and if you have the money, you can scale as much as you want. Any other questions?
For the CompTIA CSA Plus,
Yeah.
you have to have the valid current Security Plus, Network Plus, all the prerequisites. So let's say if you hit those tests and pass them, obviously infer on it if you go to the CSA Plus. So you could repeat the question.
So the question is, do you have to actually go down the line to get the CSA? Do you have to have a valid one?
No, CompTIA is pretty nice in the fact that if you're really confident and you know everything, you can go take that top level one. I mean, if you get it, you get it. Kind of the reason I'm going in that position is because when I went through school. We just went A+, Network+, Security+. And they do expire over time, so if you get the next one up, it just renews all the rest of them, essentially. So you don't have to go up the chain. If you are confident or if you're experienced, you can just take the top one, and then if you pass, you got it. Yeah. So, I mean, you can definitely take it. There is, as far as renewing your other ones, I'm not sure how much of it's going to benefit for. You do have to take, like, say, if you're going to come to the end of your Security Plus expiration in a few months, you do have to take the next one before it expires for it to actually renew the ones below it. Whether or not that really matters is, I'd say that's subjective on whoever you're trying to impress.
Any other questions?
Cool.
All right. Well, the next one we're going to shoot for next month, January 23rd, if that's okay with Sam. So Sam's the guy over there. He's going to be presenting next. And he's looking for your input on one of the two to present on. So if you guys, we're going to have a survey going around in a little bit. If you guys want to just put in your input and which one you guys would prefer. A few things that we're going to ask you. Again, this is a public thing. This is for you guys. It's just for expanding on everybody's knowledge for this. Just something to get you guys thinking. What do you guys expect out of these presentations? Is it something like this? Is it more blue teaming? Is it more red teaming? Is it a little bit of both? How technical everybody's wants it. We've kind of left it open right now for general management, anybody in the public that's just looking to get in IT with zero background. If that's not the case, if everybody here's got a pretty good background, we could skip to the more technical stuff. And then what kind of setup are you guys looking for? Is classroom style kind of like this what you guys are looking for? Or should we have an open-ended discussion some days? Or should it always be a presentation style? So just something to try to get back from you guys. And we're looking to grow. And then if anybody knows anybody or any businesses that are willing to help grow the ECInfoSec, just let us know. Survey is going to have option to actually leave your name and information, and we'll go from there. If anybody's looking to talk or has any questions at all, just contact us via here, and if you got any questions at the end, you can always come up and talk to Ben and I. And that's it.